I love 3D platformers. The delightful worlds to explore, the interesting movement mechanics, the room for innovation and refinement. While Nintendo remains the frontrunner of the genre, I feel like there's so much more room to explore and so much more ground to cover. Which is why it made me a little sad to see how few people seem to play Penny's Big Breakaway when it released early 2024. The debut game from developers Evening Star. It is a delightfully unique 3D platformer starring the titular Penny and her oversized, aggressive yo-yo. Evening Star, the developers, have an interesting history. Co-founder Christian Whitehead was a lead developer on Sonic Mania in 2017. In fact, a lot of the development staff from Sonic Mania came over to Evening Star, and they were initially in the works to make more Sonic games for Sega, though that ended up falling through. But with the massive success of Sonic Mania, you would expect a bit of that attention to transfer over, but I don't think that has really happened, which is a shame because Penny's Big Breakaway is an absolute delight. I wanted to make a video to talk about the interesting mechanics introduced in this title, and how they're used to create a star of the movement platform genre. I do aim to quite holistically review the game as well, so there's a lot to cover. First, we will handle the second-to-second gameplay, then we will broaden out to discuss levels, bosses, things like that. Then we will broaden out to discuss more aspects of the level design. So without further ado, welcome to Penny's Big Breakaway. Now, this is a platforming game through and through. In each level, you are simply tasked with reaching the end. Whether you need to get up over a wall, need to cross a large gap, or have some other obstacle in your way, all you need to do is use your basic movement abilities and level-specific interactables in order to make your way. The level designs are all very interesting, so we're going to discuss that more in depth later. What's more important right now is to go over the actual movement itself. Of course you can jump, but just about everything else you can do revolves around your most important tool, the yo-yo. You can fling out the yo-yo, you can twirl the yo-yo around you in a big circle, you can twirl it around you in the air, you can pull yourself forward with the yo-yo, you can swing with the yo-yo, you can even ride it. This makes up your true moveset. Skillful use of these various abilities constitute the main gameplay loop of Penny's Big Breakaway. I think the most apt comparison of the gameplay is probably Mario Odyssey. In Mario Odyssey, you use Cappy quite a bit in your platforming, as almost a secondary entity to Mario that you can manipulate to get Mario higher and further. I think that idea of this secondary entity is core of the gameplay here. For example, you can throw your yo-yo out at any time with the right stick. It follows the movement of the stick and can be used to damage enemies. But if you do that in midair, you will throw it out horizontally and swing underneath it. While the yo-yo maintains its position, the player character dips under and then is launched up on the other end. As a player, you have to use each of these two entities to slingshot each other around, while they sometimes have different positions in the space. But it never gets too unruly or overcomplicated, because the yo-yo is always close enough to still be attached by the string. I think it's super interesting and a lot of fun. The way you can control the yo-yo with the right stick and Penny with the left reminds me of something like Astral Chain, another amazing underrated game. Of course, a lot of the moves can be executed through button presses if you need some more precision than the stick offers, and often you do, but it retains the simple, valuable depth to the movement. Though what really ties all of it together is the style meter. Just like Devil May Cry or any other similar games, your moves will be rewarded but with points, but you can increase how many you get and even attain multipliers by performing well and without any interruptions. Usually, this sort of system is applied to combat, incentivizing big combos, stringing together all your different sort of attacks. But here, it's for platforming. Your various movement options each offer different points, and you get diminishing returns for repeating the same thing over and over. So every second of gameplay there is a big reminder in the corner to try to mix things up and use everything at your disposal. I think a lot of the time in platform games, players will sort of find what works and not branch out any further. Unlike with combat, where executing it better and better is basically the goal of the game, the goal of platforming isn't always about the jumps and the moves, it's about where you're trying to go. So by bringing the focus to each and every move in your arsenal, Penny's Big Breakaway basically teaches you how to play the game like speedrunners play Mario 64 or Mario Odyssey. I really think that is the little magic trick at the core of the gameplay. But I guess to explain why it works so well, it's worth getting into what those moves actually are, what options your moveset provides. Of course you've been staring at this the whole video so far, but let's slow it down a bit, as it's a little dizzying when you watch them all string together. It is quite simple. You have a couple options like I explained before, especially with the open control you have over the yo-yo with the right stick. but most of the time you'll be chaining the swing, the forward dash, and the riding function. You can add to this with small bits of air you get by simply throwing out the yo-yo or wall jumping and things like that. It only stops when you're hurt or you land on the ground with your feet. You can only swing on your yo-yo and dash once while midair, but you're able to reset it by riding on top and rolling around. It counts as contact with the ground without actually ending the combo multiplier, allowing you to continue on with your movement. It all works together really well, and it was clearly prototyped to an insane extent. I like that the main triple combo is to keep things going is always very simple and easy to get a handle of. But if you want to experiment a little further and start adding in more complicated maneuvers, you have the room for it. It's never too overwhelming with endless options and techniques, but it isn't so exceedingly simple in a way that it would bore the people this kind of game is made for. It hits a perfect sweet spot. Now it comes to whether the other aspects of the game design support or counteract this core conceit. And to be honest, it kind of depends. So let's go through each process and see whether it adds or subtracts. First, we'll start with the enemies. A hefty majority of the enemies work in one simple way. They attack in hordes and attach onto the player. If 5 of them hang on, then you take damage. The only way to remove them is by doing any of the actions that the game categorizes as tricks. This further incentivizes the player to engage with these systems, and it rewards those who are better at them so they can remove them almost instantly, or to just avoid the enemies in the first place. I think this works quite well to tie things together. However, our next topic sort of doesn't. There are a number of power-ups in the game. They usually accentuate a single sort of action, like attacking with the yo-yo or riding atop of it. They aren't bad per se. I think they do a serviceable job offering a slight mix-up in order to prevent the game from being too stale in one note, but they are definitely nothing special, and that separation from the core gameplay loop usually limits your moveset rather than expanding it. I think that's enough to drag it down. Now we come to the design of the levels themselves. Of course, each world comes with different sorts of obstacles and mechanics. They vary in quality on the whole, but in relation to the main mechanics, they often are designed to encourage movement opportunities available to the player. Lots of slopes to gather speed as you ride, simple changes in elevation to encourage swings and double jumps, and all while peppering in various challenges, goals, enemies, and the like. This type of movement system could easily be wasted in a game with a more open-world approach to design, where the levels are flat and without much particular authoring. So I think the game does a good job making every level feel deliberate, concise, and entertaining all the way throughout. But what's most critically important are those simple changes in elevation, the way the level incentivizes and facilitates use of the swinging momentum. You launch up and down. A lot of these levels involve climbing upwards and then plummeting or skating down a slope. It's still generally a horizontal plane overall, but the entire thing is built on these smaller ups and downs, and the time it does stretch out into hallways and the like, it makes you go as fast as possible, giving you power-ups, some sort of extra momentum, things like that. This is for an important reason. When it comes to the controls that I explained earlier, they can end up being sort of repetitive. If you have a long straight shot, you will repeat the exact same cycle of inputs in order to maintain combo. You launch forward, you swing, you skate on your yo-yo to restore the launch and the swing, you repeat. This wouldn't be very fun, would it? Instead, the need to go up or down demands a lot finer usage of the swinging. You can't always just skate on your yo-yo, as enemies may catch up with you, or there may be hazards on the ground or no ground at all. The dash is pure horizontal movement, it doesn't get you upwards at all, so it serves to cut down on the boring bits, keeping the pace and energy at a high. This is really what makes that work, and the level design graciously supports it. So overall, the construction of each level, each platform, each route is really good. Maybe not as varied as it could be. I think the world-specific mechanics can be pretty underwhelming, but on the whole, the foundation of it is the game's true fun. That's pretty good. However, I can't be quite as positive about the challenges. Each level has 6 collectibles. They don't really amount to much of a reward, but I don't mind that bit quite as much. Instead, I just think the execution doesn't always line up with the game's positive qualities. Half of them are plain and simple showpieces scattered throughout the level. These can be some of the best, as they are in the corners of the level that require better execution of the mechanics in order to reach. Those are usually quite fun, but can run the risk of being very out of the way. With the combo system and the level timer, you aren't just incentivized to make things up, but you're incentivized to do it quickly. Speed is a big part of it, and feeling like you need to take a detour and reduce that speed in order to 100% complete the level is hard to categorize as good or bad. I think it depends on how you want to engage with the design and what parts of it you think are better. Of course, that kind of goes for all game design and everything I am discussing, but personally, I'm in the middle of this specific kind. Some of the showpieces are instead integrated more closely into the level design, only reachable with good gameplay, but not far out of the way of your current objective. These I like the most, and they feel the best to get. The other ones are tucked in the corner and don't really require any sort of good execution. They are actively hard to find if you're playing the level well. Hidden underneath things around the corner, things like that. The level design doesn't feel constructed with this mind for exploration. They are very abstract, straight shots forward, so I don't think these necessarily fit very well, and they can be frustrating to miss and aren't exactly fun to find. I think these are supposed to incentivize replays and checking every nook and cranny, while also wanting to do a separate run to get through it as fast as possible with the highest score, but I don't think they offer quite enough to perform that duty. Then there are the little dilemmas. Characters will have various needs that the player can fulfill. Often they require carrying something that you will drop if you take damage. It will require picking up some small items that appear, usually with a timer, things like that. A lot of them are quite fun, and it's the sort of thing you would expect in a game like this. But their biggest issue is just that some of them are finicky in a way that doesn't mix with the rest, and when they do work, they can be annoying to trigger and complete. When I'm talking about this sort of streamlined design, it can quickly fall into a pit of claiming that any sort of friction is bad design because it doesn't mesh with the rest of the game. I don't think that's a useful critique, so that's not what I mean. When I say these dilemmas are at their best, you have to complete a small platforming section with an extra challenge, which is very fun. But when I say they get finicky in a way I don't like, it's because the challenge removes mechanics that make the game fun. Rather than testing to see if you can perform even better than usual, it's asking you to perform a similar activity that's a little less enjoyable. That's the real sticking point. And when I mention they can be annoying to trigger and complete, this brings us to our final little topic, which is just polish. Sometimes the bounds of where you need to stand in order to start or finish one of these dilemmas is actively confusing. Some require you to touch the ground, which means you have to kill your combo in order to start, which just sucks. There were a couple times where I thought I had succeeded, but the game didn't really function right and instead failed me, or even vice versa. Sometimes it's hard to tell when this sort of thing is intentional. Take the checkpoints, for example. They require you to touch the ground fully in order to register, thus killing the combo. This could be a deliberate choice, a sort of risk-reward mechanic. It's not really my particular favorite thing, but I can respect the vision. But it clashes with the visual design. The checkpoints are lampposts with a circle of light you have to step into. When I'm mid-air and caught by the light, it feels weird that I arbitrarily have to stand in this rigid little circle for it to really work. Not to mention the fact that even if you are willing to bite the lack of a combo, walking past it or zooming past it is usually more convenient than actually standing in it. A checkpoint like Sonic, where it's a wide goalpost that works regardless of where you are horizontally or vertically, feels a lot better. But then again, it could still be deliberate, where it's about a choice. You can choose not to get the checkpoints. I wouldn't really understand why there's no reward to doing so, but it could be. And stuff like this becomes even harder to pinpoint as deliberate and accidental when the game is just a bit buggy overall. A lot of the boss fights are quite unpolished and don't always work as intended. I fell through the floor every now and then, and that sort of thing can unnecessarily bog down a game despite not being an issue with the design or the gameplay. Just a little underdone in places. It's a shame. I guess they're taking a bit too much inspiration from early 3D Sonic. But all in all, that brings us to the end of this video. I do think Penny's Big Breakaway is a good game despite its minor faults. I really love how it acts as both a gateway into slightly more precise 3D platformers for newcomers, while also servicing veterans of the genre. It's a type of game we don't see enough of, so when an entry just seems to drift by without much attention, it makes me sad. But I can see the small sticking points that might drag it down for some people. It is by no means perfect, but still absolutely worth a try. So I recommend Penny's Big Breakaway. I think it has some interesting and innovative design, cute aesthetics, and delightful gameplay, even if it's rough around the edges. So let me know what you think if you've had the privilege to give the game a try, and as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.